Is everything forbidden, except crossing our arms? Poverty is not our fate written in the stars. Underdevelopment is not part of God's obscure plan for us. We are undergoing a period of revolutions, a time of redemption. Latin America's wounds are open, and it is fervently searching for a new social order. Six years ago, governments of 189 countries belonging to the United Nations adopted the Objectives for the Development of the Millennium, MDO, a global commitment designed to reduce inequality and improve human development with a goal set for the year 2015. Latin America and the Caribbean must improve their efforts to reach their goals for the millennium. There's been some progress, but it's simply not enough. According to the United Nations, 1 out of 10 Latin Americans is undernourished, a condition suffered by 52 million people, despite the fact that the region has the capability to produce enough food for 1,800 million people. Thus, poverty and exploitation transform those who should be privileged into victims. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 17 million children under the age of 17 are employed earning salaries 80% lower compared to adult laborers, and many times they receive no pay at all. Many children engage in dangerous activities without the minimum safety conditions and are frequently forced to work 12-hour shifts. In spite of the fact that international agreements condemn child labor in children under 15 if it endangers their health or education, the United Nations, the UN, and the International Labor Organization, the ILO, consider that in poor countries, children between the ages of 12 and 14 can work doing simple tasks for a maximum of 14 hours a week. Children are victims of child trafficking, slavery, servitude provoked by adult debts, pornography, and they are recruited to take part in armed conflicts and drug trafficking. An endemic country is unviable, and the lack of water is lethal. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, 80% of the world's illness is due to lack of drinkable water. Each year, 2 million people die of diarrhea, cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever, and malaria. Children are the most vulnerable. Every 8 seconds, a child dies because of these causes. While 95% of the urban population in Latin America and the Caribbean has potable water, only 69% of the rural population has access to this resource. Today, informal economy should not be considered a marginal or temporary issue, since it employs half of the world's labor force. The consequences of informal labor are lack of rights, low and unstable income without any social security. In Latin American countries, informal economy represents 6 out of 10 new jobs that are created within the informal sector. Despite the fact that most countries have succeeded in achieving equal educational opportunities for women and have been able to reduce the income gap between the sexes, income discrimination and violence against women are still common practices. On the other hand, we have seen some improvement in congressional representation for women, but it's still insufficient. The truth is that not enough progress has been achieved in matters such as the reduction of extreme poverty by 50%, the universalization of elementary education, the reduction of maternal death by 2/3, a significant improvement in health rights, nor in the reversion of environmental decay. In a document entitled International Migration, Human Rights and Latin American Development, endorsed by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, in 2005, Latin American and Caribbean immigration to the United States totaled 25 million people, led by Mexico, Colombia, and the Caribbean. However, it doesn't stop there. Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Peru, Nicaragua, or the Dominican Republic are all looking for the legendary American dream and will do everything necessary to achieve it. Latin American migrants have become the first ethnic minority of the United States, of which almost 50% are illegal workers. Today, these Latinos are protesting and crowding the streets of the U.S. in the search for self-defense. Extreme poverty is still very high. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 42.9% of the population is considered poor. Poverty affects 222 million people, of which 96 million, or 1 out of 5 persons, is homeless. A new breed of young people appear in the scenario. Their names: La Vida Loca, Blood for Blood, Denfo tu Barrio, To Die for El Barrio, La MM, Mexican Mafia, La Mara 13, La Mara 18, Los Panochos, La 21, Los Salvatrucha. These are only a few of the new symbols of a deep-rooted problem. Young people organized for self-defense in enemy territories, where to be young and poor, and even more, a migrant, means to be discriminated, where the only way out is to break the law, where violence, an element of capitalism, is confronted with even more violence. A recent statement by El Salvador's general attorney is worth mentioning. The consequences of the post-war period were underestimated and mistakes were made. When security and guerrilla forces were demobilized, 40,000 men were left at large. Men who throughout those years had learned to defend themselves or to kill depended on their only skill, dealing with weapons. The National Police Force, the PNC, was a disorganized force, unprepared to control urban delinquency, which is quite different to the guerrilla. The economy had collapsed and the creation of new jobs had come to zero. Around that time, the U.S. government began deporting Salvadorans who had been imprisoned or had broken the law. Thousands came back with no control whatsoever. We had no clue of their identities or criminal records. Many came directly from prisons, and since they had not committed any crimes here, were freed the moment they arrived at the airport. So, they joined the gangs. The first years after the war, Maras remained undetected and almost hidden in the turmoil of urban delinquency. It wasn't until 10 years later, in 2002, when the Salvadoran government began to implement certain measures, but the problem was already out of control. What can we learn from this problem? Does it mean we are facing a shared reality in an irrational way?
Violencia que no solo emana de delincuentes comunes, sino que también evidencia la participación de grupos que, ocultos en la impunidad, violentan y asesinan a quienes no comulgan con sus intereses.
Contradictions and social differences have become the new frontiers, the muros de tortilla, that's the tortilla walls, that will either have to be demolished or stopped. It is said that the 20th century ended on November 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the 21st century began on 9/11, as if all men were devoted to demolish the walls that divide us only to rebuild barriers that seem to separate ourselves even more from those different from us, and consequently feared. Octavio Paz wrote, "Cultures are born as a result of mixture, encounters, and confrontations. Therefore, civilizations die as a result of isolation." The new frontiers are not only conventional borders separating one country from another, but also barriers that establish or deepen social differences and discrimination. If we turn our attention towards the virtual world, there are more than enough reasons to congratulate ourselves for the multiple possibilities offered by modern interactive communication media. Although the digital breach among those who have access to modern communications and those who don't gets irreversibly wider every day. Latin America has advanced enormously in the long and winding road towards democracy. In the words of economist Jeffrey D. Sachs, the only way that could lead the region towards ending economical disparities that obstruct economical development is a political consolidation of the region. The International Monetary Fund, as well as the World Bank, have insisted on globalization models that deprive Latin America from a technological development, added Sachs, head of the Millennium Objectives of the United Nations and the World Institute, who considers that both organizations have given too much emphasis to market liberalization and stabilization instead of focusing on industrial policies that would result in better development. Asia is a clear example that industrial policies are not anti-market. They are pro-market if done correctly. There are multiple contradictions in free trade agreements, but the real needs of distant neighbors are visible and much more powerful.